Hey everyone, Rob and Jason here again with another episode of Smart Conversations. Jason, how you doing?
I'm good, Rob. How are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. I should probably explain for anyone.
You can explain the active wear, are you?
Yeah, as you called it, active wear. I've just got out of the ice bath, so I've got my big snuggly coat on post ice bath. So if I'm a little bit high on energy as well, that's the reason why.
No, excellent. And you notice that I've placed my little fake pet dog up on the top shelf in support of dudes and dogs.
Maybe we should start placing something on each of our bookshelves each week and trying to guess what the edition is. That's the game for our viewers.
if you're listening to this, it's
listening on the podcast is a challenge. But if you're watching it on YouTube, then that's how we'll entertain you. And you forget the chat, watch the bookshelf.
I mean, it's these types of innovations that are making this podcast a raging success already, right?
I think we're up to tens of viewers.
Nice one. Okay, it's good. Lovely. So, where do we start? We thought we'd kind of talk about how things been going with you around the anxiety management and perhaps some, probably useful kind of experience you had over the weekend, right?
Yeah, I sort of opened up to Jason about something over the weekend, and it made me. I felt a bit strange saying it in some way, but the anxiety busting challenge has been going really well, and as I said, it's allowed me to get on with stuff while still being anxious, but still carrying on with stuff. But over the weekend, on Saturday night, I found myself sat down. I hadn't been drinking or anything. I was just watching some sports, and my mind started racing in a really negative way, like throwing every possible. I was imagining what people were thinking about me when I had no idea whether they were thinking about me at all. I was worrying about situations that are way beyond my control, and I was going to the worst case. I was catastrophizing it all, and it was resulting in a really strong sort of anxiety panic attack. Almost. Actually, it wasn't a panic attack, but a lot of the physical symptoms were, because I've spoken about my physical, like I get sick, but what I noticed, my legs get really restless and really heavy, and they were trembling and bouncing. And almost like I'd been running or something for a long period of time, and I sat there and I said this to Jason. I don't know how to say this in any other way other than I had a word with myself. I sat and talked to what I call my chimp, my voice in my head that throws all these negative things, and I sort of said, look, if you spoke to another person like the way you speak to yourself, you would be appalled, you'd be embarrassed and ashamed. So why do you let yourself do it to yourself?
Yeah.
And I started to just sort of have a conversation with my chimp, with the, when I say chimp, I'm talking about the thing that makes me go into that anxious mode and panic mode, rather
it's your alarm brain, your anxious brain, whatever people want to call it, right? Whatever kind of works for them.
Yeah, and I used to call it a name of someone I didn't like, actually, but then I realized actually I need to love my chimp as well, not just hate it. So
because your chimp is well intentioned, means well, but is a bit stupid.
And that was actually, mate, you kind of summed up. That was the conversation I had, where I sort of just said to my chimp, "It's look, you are vital to who I am and the way I am, and you give me all my emotional strength and dexterity and allow me to be in tune with people. But you're also the reason I feel like this, and it's really important that you let me take the lead for a little bit, because up to a lot recently, it's been them in charge and the sort of emotional response rather than the natural good one. And as I say, and as I said, as I said to myself, I'm good at, when you step back and relax and let me take control, but you're still there for all that emotional like heights and stuff. We're really good and we kind of kill life and really thrive. It's when you take control and take over completely that we struggle. And I sort of negotiated with myself, and literally, Jason, within an instant, like that restless leg thing I was saying about, it just went. It completely calmed down. My legs like felt beautifully like achy, like after an exercise or an ice bath. And I felt my anxiety dropping, and I found myself for the rest of the night almost chatting in a really positive way with myself. I'd realigned like the conversation I was having, and it was like, can you imagine if we applied this sort of thinking to our sport and to day-to-day life and other things?
Imagine if they did this every day.
Imagine if you hadn't been a twat our whole life. Imagine if this was day-to-day, and it was a really positive thing, but I didn't know how to say it without sounding slightly like I spent the weekend talking to myself.
Yeah, it strikes me that you feel a bit awkward the way you're wording what
Yeah,
happened, having words. Why do you feel awkward about saying it or saying it in that way?
I don't. That's a really good question, because I know fundamentally what I was doing with that was what we've spoken about, that notice, name, and normalize. But I I don't know the answer to that, mate.
Mm, yeah,
Honestly, it's ego. Actually, I do. It's ego again. It's that people say. I think for ages, you think you kind of get this stereotype of people talking to themselves being, the things from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, not from everyday life. But actually, what I'm realizing is that self-talk and talking to yourself is absolutely vital, even if I'm still a bit embarrassed to talk about it.
well, you can have smart conversations with yourself, right? Not other
Absolutely.
people. And actually, this is a really important self-management strategy. Managing your mental health, managing your performance in sport or at work or wherever it is. It's actually a really critical strategy that you need to hone, and you can develop in many different ways, right? So I think you're bang on there. You did do notice the name of the anxiety. So here's another question that she may or may not be able to answer. Why were you able to do it in that moment? What do you think made the difference that allowed you to effectively, stand back and kind of look at the anxiety that's represented as a chimp, right, in this particular instance? But what allowed you to do that, do you think?
So this is literally just thinking out loud,
Yep.
but I think that the fact that I'm doing this challenge to allow myself to do just that, to think and process, there wasn't a conscious moment where I went, tonight I'm going to I'm going to renegotiate terms.
Yeah.
It just started happening.
Yeah.
So again, I think that goes back to what we said in the previous videos, that it's not necessarily removing the anxiety, it's allowing me to function and think better while still dealing with it.
Yeah.
I think that's the answer.
So anxiety management's in mind. So you're perhaps kind of scanning on the lookout for a bit more than you normally would be, and perhaps that was
And a willingness.
Yeah, and being able to kind of scan your body and detect what are my physical sensations, my emotions, my thoughts, etc.
Okay.
That's, as we've been saying, that's all practice to be able to then do this spontaneously, right? And I think physical sensations is a really good place to focus on if this stuff is unfamiliar to you, because most people can scan their body for physical sensations, right? And over time learn what are the physical sensations associated with a particular difficult psychological state that you're trying to manage better. In your case, anxiety.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're on the lookout for the physical sensations, that can automatically trigger that kind of process of notice and name, because you use something very concrete as your starting point, stuff that feels like it's physically happening in your body, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think procrastination I've realized was playing a big part in me sort of taking those steps, and
Right.
and that's I do put things off when I particularly when it comes to managing my mental health, because and my excuse to myself is probably, oh, dudes and dogs is my focus, and looking after that. But as I say, and I say that because I think what you said is really important just then, that it comes from practicing the notice, name, and normalize, and that will just happen, or at least it did for me.
Yeah. No, absolutely right. And I think the other really interesting thing, other really important thing, is that you then kind of automatically started talking to yourself in what sounds like a more helpful way. And it wasn't like you sat there and kind of planned out, right, I'm going to say this to my chimp brain and that to my chimp brain, and I'm going to say it in that order. It was almost like notice and name just kind of automatically triggered you to start spontaneously, without planning it, having a kind of conversation with the chimp brain that ultimately really helped you in that moment, right?
Yeah, and the positive conversation happened naturally after positive action.
Yeah.
That was the thing. It was like, for instance, there's a series, The Last of Us, and it's like this, apocalyptic sort of end of the world thing. And have you watched it?
No, but I'm really wondering where this conversation's going now.
It's awesome, but basically watching it, it's really tense and over dramatic, and my anxiety gets really high watching it. I stuck one on Saturday night, and I found myself laughing and talking to myself while watching it, just like at a different mindset that I could enjoy the TV program. It's such a simple thing, but I was even enjoying TV in a different mindset by allowing myself to have that conversation.
Yeah. Notice a name, essentially, it's getting you to unhook, step back, get some mental distance between you and that uncomfortable, difficult, awful psychological state that you're experiencing. And when you've got that kind of mental distance from that psychological state, it's much easier to kind of pivot and do something different, right? Have a response that is good in the long term for your anxiety management, rather than falling into the trap of doing something that actually just keeps the anxiety going, like avoidance or excessive distraction, etc.
Okay.
Yeah, and most people, I think, are more skilled psychologically than they realize. And I get this a lot working with people that if they really get into this notice and name strategy, good things just automatically happen afterwards in terms of the choices they make around how I respond to or cope with this difficult psychological state, be it anxiety or depression or anger or whatever.
Yeah, and say without a doubt, it's happened very naturally from those very simple basic steps of as I say, because my anxiety is something I hate so much, and I've kind of ignored or tried to not concentrate on the feelings, as opposed to actually concentrating and feeling them, as I've allowed myself to do recently.
Yeah. So that sounds really good, and I think that's just something to keep going with. And again, in that moment, you weren't explicitly trying to kind of reduce your anxiety. You just kind of notice that you're anxious, and you started talking to yourself. And we talked a couple of conversations ago. We talked about be wary of having reduced anxiety as your outcome or only kind of outcome that you're shooting for. Instead, if you focus on, I want to respond to my anxiety in a particular way, kind of focus on the response or other types of outcomes as well, that helps take the pressure off a little bit. And paradoxically, I think means that you're more likely to experience a reduction in anxiety when that isn't your kind of sole or primary focus.
So, as I say, it came very naturally for me, I think, because of the notice, name and normalize and the challenge I'm doing. But one thing that doesn't come naturally for me, at least, and I don't know about anyone else's anxiety or anything or any state, but it's very hard to think like this and think practically when you have an anxiety attack or a panic attack. So what can you do to, one, notice, and then two, to try and take some steps, even knowing it won't get rid of your anxiety, but just start noticing it again?
Kind of just practice as much as you can, and practice with states that aren't particularly unpleasant or they're kind of mundane or whatever. So just practicing switching from kind of doing mode, going about your life, to kind of being mode, where I'm noticing and naming, describing, in other words, the state I'm having. So just regular practice, no matter what the inner state is, it is a really good way to practice and develop that skill. And just kind of be patient with yourself, because when you're in the throes of a difficult inner state, and it's quite kind of intense, quite powerful, it is very hard to notice and name. It is very hard to kind of mentally step back and kind of observe it. So you just need to kind of develop that skill gradually over time, and just kind of be patient with yourself. Also, what you can do is that if you are pretty good, or you pick up the skill pretty quickly of scanning my body physically and seeing the physical signs of the anxiety, just kind of pre-arrange with yourself, here, if possible, is the thing I'm going to do in that moment to try and manage my anxiety. So it might be I'll go and get some exercise. I'll talk to a supportive friend or something like that. So you can kind of pre-plan, rather than having to come up with in the moment, oh, what am I going to do? Because if you're really hooked into that difficult inner state, that chimp brain is dominating your thinking. Basically your alarm brain's dominating the thinking, and the bit of your brain that's able to problem solve and plan and select better options, it's basically gone offline, or it's really impaired. Yeah, so that's why it's literally difficult to, to think rationally when you're kind of upset, because the bit of your brain that's able to think rationally has kind of gone offline, or it's been kind of just blocked out by the alarm brain, because the alarm brain's going, danger, I don't need that bit of my brain, I'm going to kind of block it and just focus on kind of survival and getting out of this situation.
Okay, so it's you almost need to write down your plan, contingency plan almost, or coping plan, I should say, when you're in a better mental state. So you've got those ideas, and it'd be really simple. It's whatever works for you, but something that you can do. Okay.
And I think probably what really helped you in that situation is that you kind of literally talk to your chimp brain.
Yeah, I really did, and I want to emphasize that, and it's the bit that I was embarrassed about, and not embarrassed, but I was shy about sharing, is I really held a two-way conversation with myself.
Well, think of it as it's a conversation between my rational brain and my chimp brain.
Yeah.
And actually setting it up that way, where you're literally talking to your chimp brain, is just a really smart way to try and activate your rational brain skills, or your rational brain thinking again.
Yeah, and I had to be quite gentle and kind with that, like, part of my brain, quite like how I handled it. It felt like dealing with the fireworks that might go off, in terms of how I talk to it, and very kindly and reassurance and stuff. But that might be personal to me, as I say.
Well, and think about it. If you think about a young child who's freaked out and anxious, would you scream at them to chill out, relax, kind of Gordon Ramsay style? Yeah. Or would you say, hey, it's okay. There's no real danger here. Let's kind of talk about how we can kind of calm down and make you feel better. Yeah. So whatever works for you, this is what psychologists call kind of externalizing a psychological state. So by you calling it a chimp, you're kind of mentally taking a bit of your brain, the alarm system in your brain, and converting it into like a separate external entity, a chimp. And that's just a psychological trick to make it easier for you to kind of unhook, step back, and then the logical thing then is to kind of talk, because now it's another thing. The logical thing is to have a conversation with it. Yeah,
now you've identified it. Yeah, and I think I don't know if I've always called it my chimp, because I started this talking about, or recognizing this in myself through I think a lot of people, with the chimp paradox by Steve Peters.
Yeah, lots of people know about it, don't they?
Yeah, loads of people, and it's I think it's quite a good introduction, actually, if you've never thought about that side. It puts it in terms that people can easily understand. But I've always called it a chimp because that's where I started, and actually I think there's probably a better name for mine, because it really is something that enhances and grows me and benefits me. It's just making sure I'm in charge of it, rather than the other way around.
And you made a really really important point, that you need to still be kind to this bit of your brain, because this bit of your brain isn't bad, it's well intentioned.
Absolutely.
But misguided, not very bright. It sets off false alarms, right? So it's trying to protect you, it's trying to look after you by producing really powerful emotions to get you to act, because in that moment it thought there was danger, right? And so something well intentioned, again, you don't scream at it, you don't kind of abuse it, you just say, hey, look, you've got it, thanks, but you've got it wrong this time, right? I'm going to kind of take over at this point. And next time when you set off the alarm, we'll check again to see whether, that's something I need to take notice of, or no, this is another false alarm. We don't need to react in the way that you're trying to get me to.
Yeah. I read a book a few years back which was called Everyone Should Be Your Own Psychologist. Basically, was the principle of it. And I love the title, I love the principle, and I was around it, but it wasn't till I started to have these conversations and addressing these things, I realized that that's exactly what we can be to ourselves. It takes time and practice and really a lot of effort, but we can absolutely be our own psychologist and our own therapist and help.
And like most people, as I said, you're more skilled than you realize. And if you can put a bit of a framework in place with some basic kind of strategies for yourself, that can often draw out the skills that are there, but they're not particularly they're not very accessible. They're like in a file drawer, but they're all kind of messed up. You know, if you give you basic strategies, it helps kind of organize it so you can go in there and find them more easily.
So is this potentially a conversation that myself or other people should keep having with themselves, or actually is it something which is an important conversation, but we move on and develop it effectively, rather than going back to that same point of not berating, but of negotiating with the chimp? Effectively, negotiated terms now. Actually, is it's time to start putting those into practice and just reassuring rather than trying to have those big internal conversations?
Well, when you start having the conversation with your chimp or your alarm brain, or whatever people want to call it, what you're doing there, it's more noticing and naming, right, and kind of mentally unhooking. But it's also at a kind of transition point as well, where, you know, what you say is kind of important and what you do from that point is important as well. So I guess when you start talking to your alarm brain or your kind of chimp brain, you can see that as representing kind of a junction or a point at which you're bringing in notice and name, and, you know, kind of externalize or unhooking or whatever you want to call it. And then from that point, you're making decisions around what I do next. So what exactly do I say to my chimp brain, and what are the other strategies I know of or I've been taught that could come in here and make me more effective in this situation? So it's a little bit of both, if that makes sense. Notice, name, unhooking. There's a combination of kind of awareness, but it's also an intervention in its own right as well, as you saw on Saturday, right? Because doing notice and name, that automatically just kind of triggered a different conversation with yourself. That was quite helpful.
Very much so.
Yeah. Nice one. Doing well, eh? Yeah.
We're nearly a month into the challenge, and it's certainly making a difference.
Yep. And you know, I've battled horrendous anxiety for a long period of time, so I've got this perspective of having kind of done this professionally, like with people, but also seeing me over many years really battle with it and struggle to get on top of it. And, you know, compared to 20 years ago, I'm in a much better place. But it is an ongoing work in progress, and you shouldn't be afraid to try different things. Because what's going to work for me is not necessarily going to work for you. The kind of official strategies you might get from a clinical psychologist, they might work quite well, but then there might be other things that work even better for you, you know, that are not labeled, strictly speaking, as kind of therapeutic or therapy, right? So
it's therapy for you, and it works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really good going, Rob. It's going to vary a bit from week to week. Some weeks going to be more successful than others, but that's completely normal. Focus on the trend over a period of weeks, not how you've gone over one day or a week. That's how you really track your progress. Is like, how have I gone over the last few weeks? Yeah. So we're going to talk about another strategy, right, around anxiety management, one of the three that you're focused on, which is creating kind of boundaries between working and personal time, right?
Indeed. And it's probably the one I have been the loosest with out of the three at the end of my day. So doing the 6 a.m. starts, but I'm still struggling to switch off at 2:30, 3 o'clock when I should. It's very easy not in the evenings, and I'm getting better, and it's something I'm consciously doing. Like, my laptop isn't in the same room as me, but I think of things in the evening, and I would just get on my laptop and start doing them. I've just changed that up, and I scribble them down on the pad for the next day.
Yeah. So this is a topic that people know in principle, that I need to have boundaries, I need to have work-life balance, but still many people really struggle to do it in practice. And I get a lot of people coming to me scratching their head saying, well, okay, this isn't rocket science. I know I shouldn't work 18 hours a day. I'm going to fall over pretty quick, but, you know, something stops them from implementing changes or being a bit more strict with their time. And this is usually where you need to focus in on in order to be effective with this particular strategy. And this is where someone like me can come in at times to actually ask the question, what are the psychological or the kind of hidden barriers that are preventing you going from, I know I should be doing this, to actually, I am doing this.
Okay, and there's there's quite a big answer to that, which I'm still kind of unpicking in my head as well, about why I'm still doing this. And I think it's partly, if I'm honest, it's fear of not doing it, but it's also this feeling of where we're at with dudes and dogs and the journey we're on. And this goes for anyone who's got pressure and stress or deadlines even in their lives that come in, is that just because you have a deadline and a pressure, working till 10 o'clock isn't going to be the solution. And at the moment, if I again, this isn't something I really want to say on camera, but I don't have a huge amount in my life outside of dudes and dogs. So it's very easy for that to become my life. And what we were talking about around identity last week and things, kind of dudes and dogs has become a bit of my identity as well. So I am struggling to separate the two. That said, the other thing which I meant to mention is I have signed up to a tennis club as well. Like I said, I was going to get back into sport.
Oh, really?
I signed up to a tennis club, so I'm going next week for my first session. So
have you got some really short white shorts?
Yeah, seriously injured and in whites.
Are you going to go 80s persona?
It's always
like the old school kind of Wimbledon tennis, really inappropriately tight shorts. And
do you remember Michael Leconte? He was a Frenchman.
No.
I'm
not much of a tennis fan, to be honest with you.
Well, it's a random reference, but they are my two favourite players, and not because of their tight shorts, but they were tight short wearers.
I'm not sure why I'm so fixated on tight shorts.
I'm not sure why we focused so long on this when actually we were talking about structure and routine. And the point of saying that was the reason I've done that is to put something into my evening. As a fixed pattern, because at the moment there isn't anything fixed in my evening.
I think the main message on this topic is that if you're struggling to convert intention to action, like putting boundaries in place and enforcing them directly, don't fall into the trap of saying, well, I don't have the willpower, or I'm just slack, or that kind of that's a really simplistic explanation for a situation which invariably there's kind of several things going on lurking under the surface that aren't immediately obvious to you. So there's going to be cognitive factors in all likelihood, and often people have like this fear of what other people think of them if they take their foot off the accelerator bit on the workload perspective, or if it's kind of tied to your identity, thinking, well, if I don't work quite as much, then who am I, or will I be of less value, that sort of thing. So there's all sorts of things that can go on cognitively that prevent or make it much harder from people converting intention into action. But also there's kind of like environmental factors, how your environment's kind of set up. So you mentioned, if your laptop's always out and around, or in your house you can't or don't have a good office space that's can be kind of shut off when you need to, then you're going to get all those cues and triggers and reminders of work that, just do a couple of emails. So the physical environment's going to be kind of irrelevant, and and your behavior is going to be relevant as well, and your wider kind of routine or lifestyle. So if you're overly invested in kind of work or one particular thing that you're trying to put some boundaries around, there's going to be quite hard for you to do other stuff or build in other things in your life if there isn't much going on in the first place. So sometimes what people need to do is actually start building up the other side of their life. So it's there and they can leap in and out of it. And so what you've done there, that's a really good example of thinking about your wider life and what do I have outside of this thing I'm trying to contain, which is often work, and kind of joining a tennis club. So that's a really good example of finding kind of hobbies or kind of interests or things that you can start building in to your routine outside of work that then supports those efforts to have those boundaries.
It's something which I've known for a while. That I am all dudes and dogs. And I'm sure that goes to so many people, like where it's high pressure, long hours, whatever it is, that they almost really feel like that's all they are. And it's for the last few months, or not in a few months, the last couple of years, the idea of signing up to anything or joining a club created that anxiety. Until we sort of had the conversation around notice, name and normalize, until we looked at the impact losing my sports had, and sort of that conversation that it's allowed me to realize I need to put these things in place. So going back to what you said, I think my big takeaway around the hours is only allowing my laptop to live in here in this office, because I just, I take it up to bed so that when I wake at 6 a.m. I can lie in bed and do a few emails, or it'll be it'll just be on the sofa next to me. So that's the big one, big around, as you say. The laptop, I'm gonna try it. It won't leave this room, this space for this week.
Yeah. So you really nicely illustrated some of those factors, the cognitive factors, behavioral factors, environmental factors, and thinking about your general life setup, right? And if you are trying to put some boundaries around something, usually work, that's a good kind of reference point. Thinking about those factors are going to be far more useful than beating yourself up, saying, get a grip, start being firmer about this, or start being kind of slack, or just you don't have the will. These really simplistic, excessively self-critical explanations that actually won't help you address the situation. But if you actually acknowledge that, okay, there's potentially several things playing into this is making it difficult, you can start to think about what they might be, and then ultimately what can I do about those, and you've already started that process. What's been the biggest challenge so far with that for you?
What, with the challenge, or
with this strategy of trying to have the boundaries?
I don't know what the challenge has been. I just haven't been able to adopt that one as easily as the others. I can't answer why quite yet. I think it does come down to what you said around the thought, because I've set my day up so I finish before everyone else. The idea is I can get out there and enjoy the sunshine, whatever it is, see my mates at the driving range. I maybe still have that hang up that I shouldn't be
slacking off.
Slacking off at 2-3. That's probably it.
And what have you come up with so far? That's a good kind of helpful response that works you towards that goal of improved anxiety management.
With regards to that, it is only keeping busy, or just active minded, rather than sort of at 2-3 o'clock sitting down and putting the telly on or something like that. Whereas I think for me it's punctuating the end of the day, probably. Going for a run or just walking madly, whatever.
I'm going to very inappropriately just kind of close the window here because I've got some really obnoxious kind of gardening appliance going on out there. It sounds like 1,000 screaming children.
How aware they?
It's quite distracting. No, so and when you hear your brain saying, "You're being slack, you should be working," what's that bit of your brain assuming?
I don't think it's assuming anything. It's probably going back to a lot of the old stereotypes and negative beliefs I held about myself. It's going back to a place where I was, or how I used to be, maybe.
Okay.
How
you stopping at 2:30 is kind of evidence that you're still that person.
Yes. And not that I was even that person before. That's the weird thing. It's what I mean about self-talk.
Yeah. But that is the assumption, right? Finishing at 2:30 is a negative reflection on me, and it kind of starts to activate and remind you of a very unhelpful views you've had of yourself in the past.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what do you make of that assumption that finishing at 2:30 is kind of proof that you're something that you don't really like?
Well, it's silly, obviously, because I'm starting at 6.
I mean, it's not silly. It's just another well-intentioned part of your brain just doing something that really is.
I guess it's we've been conditioned for so long at 5 o'clock as your finish time as well. So maybe that.
No, exactly. So there's a lot of things going on there, and it's really important to notice and name that. And it's really important to think about what's my response the next time my brain says, "You need to keep working." So, well, actually, I've done 8 or 9 hours. I've moved my day just to suit my body clock and my lifestyle and how I want to look after myself. So I've done a full day's work.
Okay. In that case, that will be my focus then on that sort of thing this week as well. It's just trying to have that conversation rather than
Yeah.
trying to find other things to do.
Yeah, if you live with a nurse and they came through the door at 7 a.m. after a 12-hour shift, would you say you're finishing work already?
No,
Go
absolutely.
back to the ward.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's something to think about. And so hopefully that's given some people some useful stuff to kind of keep talking about notice and name and how it can work in practice with that really nice example that you brought along. And also just starting to think about boundaries and work-life balance, and just telling people that, hey, there are some hidden factors there or things under the surface that aren't immediately obvious that usually explain why you can't convert intention to action.
Actually, that last point is really good. I talk to people. I talk to my son a lot about when people might be behaving poorly or showing bad behavior. And it's like, you never know what's going on in their lives, and actually, why not apply that principle to yourself as well? You never know what's going on in the background.
Yeah, people are usually much harder on themselves than other people. And when you ask the question, well, why? Then that's kind of noticing and naming and starting to step back and going, yeah, why?
Yeah.
But it takes time. It's work in progress. It sounds like you're doing really great. So
Thanks, mate.
Keep it up.
Well, look, I'm really enjoying these chats as well. It's really interesting to listen to you and listen to your chat as well, and hear your thoughts on stuff, mate. So
Well,
really,
and I think people seeing what you're doing in action, these kind of live kind of examples, really brings this information to life. So I think that's really valuable. And yeah, doing a great job being prepared to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, and I'll try and speak about it a little less embarrassed next time.
Okay, all right. Next time you're going to come in your tennis outfit rather than your post.
Okay, I'll get the headband on. We've also got some exciting news coming up about a podcast, which Jason will tell us more about very soon, I'm sure. But we'll tell you about that next episode, I guess, and we'll do the reflections very soon as well. Have you got a good weekend planned, mate?
Say that again.
Have you got a good weekend planned?
Packing a suitcase.
Oh, yes, of course.
Off to New Zealand, the greatest country in the world, in the middle of winter. So, yeah.
Of course it is. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, we've got a bit of a trip ahead of us. So that's going to be, it's always an interesting journey.
I'm sure, mate. I'm sure.
Yeah, but you're doing really well. It was really great to talk today, and we'll record a little reflection piece for this as we're trying to do after each episode.
Yep.
And we'll see you all again soon.
Great stuff. Thanks, mate.
See you, Ryan. See you, Rob. Bye.